Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the next conversation that we're having as part of the Empower-thon, which is our inaugural fundraiser for the Parent Tween Foundation. So, Allison Maynard, thank you so much for being with me today. Number one, for your knowledge, but also number two, for your support of Parent Tween Foundation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me back.
For sure. So, if you are just tuning in, if you don't know about Parent Tween Foundation or Parent Tween Connection, the Parent Tween Connection is where parents go when they don't know where to go to get help for themselves or for their kids, primarily kids between the ages of 10 and 20. So we aim to bring you professionals from an array of backgrounds to give you insight so that when you're like, hey, my kiddo needs help with this topic, we can be like, hey, here's a professional to help you, or here's a professional, or here's a professional, or whatever it may be. And the Parent Tween Foundation's mission is to help bridge the gap, the financial gap that so frequently exists between families and the help that they need. So that's where the Parent Tween Foundation comes in, is when you say, hey, Miss Maynard has an amazing online course that I want to participate in. Oh, but maybe I can't quite swing tuition. The goal is to have financing available to help with that. So Allison, again, thank you so much. I so appreciate you. And again, your knowledge and your support.
Well, and I just think what you're doing and what you're creating and putting out into the world is so crucial right now, especially as the education system is literally falling apart before our eyes. Like, parents need resources. And what the sad thing is that a lot of parents, they don't really see it. They don't understand. Like, I was in the classroom for 17 years. I've been out for 3 years. And this year, just in the last few months, it's blown my mind how many teachers are leaving the classroom. Like, I knew a lot were leaving, but for some reason, it just really clicked in the last few months. How many teachers have left the classroom? There's even a company now that is hiring former teachers, and they put they zoom the teacher into the classroom, like online, and the teacher is teaching an actual classroom, and there's a paraprofessional in the classroom managing the classroom management while the teacher's teaching on a screen, because there have been so many teachers who are leaving. They don't know what to do. And so, it's great. Like, you've got teachers, but it's not an in-person teacher. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of issues with that, in my opinion, but they're trying to come up with creative ways to keep the schools going. So, we're seeing this in lifetime. The school system is collapsing, and parents are going to need resources, and they're going to need places to go to get assistance. And your organization, I think, is a perfect answer for a lot of the issues that parents are currently facing and will be facing, down the road, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because I see a long-term solution to long-term problems.
Agreed. Well, thank you. And thank you for the vote of confidence and the shout out. So I know when I put the call out for speakers, you've joined us before, and I was thrilled that you wanted to come back again. One of the things that I know you really talk about is, based on your 17 years in the classroom, kids are missing some foundational learning skills. And so I'm going to say, for folks tuning in, if you listened in to the conversation that I had with Jessie Coulter last week, I think it was last week. Honestly, at this point, all of my conversation dates are blurring together. But she and I talked about, like, the high achievers for whom school is just really easy, and how they're not necessarily actually learning to learn, which is going to have detrimental long-term effects. But Allison proposed the concept in a similar vein of, like, what are the 4 non-negotiable learning foundations? So if some of what we talk about today resonates, I encourage you to go listen to the conversation with Jessie, because there's going to be some overlap. And as I've mentioned to Allison several times, I love bringing professionals in who are in similar spaces, but who have different backgrounds, because the more you, as the parents and the students and the supporters of the teens, hear this same concept, even if it's presented a little bit differently, it lands for you, and we start to build and build and build. So, Allison, you say, I'm going to go back to my notes here, that the 4 kind of pillars, as you called them, of learning are study skills and organization, critical thinking and reading, and that's where your love of questioning comes in, I think.
Absolutely.
Writing, and then mindfulness and emotional well-being. And you
Mm-hmm.
propose that if we build up each of these pillars, and I suspect you're going to say that they're not really like individual silos, but that they're overlapping pillars,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
right? That the more we build these pillars, the more we create kind of like a toolbox for students, not just to be successful as students in school, but to continue to be successful as students in life down the road.
100%. 100%.
So let's start with study skills and organization. And this is where we may have some overlap with some of the conversation that Jesse and I had. These are skills, honestly, that like I was one of those kids that I think was missed as a kid. I didn't necessarily learn study skills. Organization, if you could see my office right now, you would know is not my natural state of being, nor is it my husband's, right? And I know this is the case for a lot of us. But so like, what are some of the skills in the pillar of study skills and organization that parents can help their kids develop?
Well, I think the first thing is just, question. Well, all right, let me start off by saying, as a teacher and working with kids, they would come to me either in 8th grade, 11th grade, 10th grade, and they did not know how to learn. I would ask them to read something and answer a couple questions. It's a pretty standard teacher ask. Right. And I would have kids and I would watch them. They would read. And then I would ask them a simple question like, what's the name of the character? What color was his pants or whatever? And I would get a sea full of blank faces because kids are reading for completion. They are not reading for comprehension because they just want to speed through and get it done.
Yeah.
Because especially nowadays, because we're competing with the phones and with the social media and everything, kids want to be on their devices. And so you have to slow down the process. So I think one of the most important things you can do as far as study skills and organization, other than the, having a set space to study, organizing your time and chunking out time. The Pomodoro method is really good, which is like 20 minutes of studying with a 5-minute break, those kinds of things. Annotating the text, taking notes on the text of what your kids are reading will immediately slow them down because they have to stop. And I would give them, when I would do this in class with my students, I would give them like a little guide, like, okay, you have to find one vocab word, you have to ask one question, and you have to make one comment and maybe draw a picture. It depended on what the text was. And just those things alone, super simple asks, like write a question about something you don't understand, make a comment about something that's interesting to you, look up a vocabulary word. I would have kids who I swear would say, Miss Maynard, I don't know how to read, but I remember what I read here because you take notes on the text. And by the end of the year, these kids would have these elaborate little rubrics for themselves with all the colors. I love colors. With all the colors and the notes and stuff. And they were actually retaining information because I was forcing them to slow the process down. Once the kids know how to read, then they can start doing other things. But until we can get them thinking about what they're reading. So I think just taking notes on a text, like if you want to do this at home, print up a paragraph about something that's interesting to them. If they like Pokemon, go to Wikipedia, print up a Pokemon paragraph, have them start just jotting down notes. You've got to practice consistently, but over time you will find that kids will start to be able to remember information better. And learning is all about retaining information. And so I think that's the biggest thing that parents can do as far as study skills. 100%.
And I like that you mentioned that because, I'm an SAT and ACT coach. I'm in my 25th year doing that. And pretty much every standardized test known to man, at least known to the US, has a reading section to it. And a lot of times, like, I'm not a reading specialist. Like, I'm not one who can teach kids how to read better per se. I'm always like, I can take the skill that you already bring and help you modify it to this test. But it amazes me that even college graduates fall into that category of like, I just read this paragraph and I can't put it in my own words. I cannot translate it for my own understanding. And if they can't, and so much of it, it's not even like translating it. It's like, just what does the passage say? And they don't even necessarily recognize when they have the answer to the question. And so do you feel like the thought that came up for me was like the 5 W's and H: who, what, where, when, how, why, and how. those could be good questions. If parents don't know what other questions to ask, those are good standbys, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and we actually, it's funny you bring that up. You and I actually talked about that in our last conversation about the W's. Like, you know, who is it about? Where does it take place? What is happening? Why is it happening? You know,
Sure.
and just those basic questions start to get the kids thinking in more detail about, like, well, why is this happening? They just need some structure and guidance. That's all. But you've got to slow the process of reading down. 100%, because kids, you know, again, we're competing with all of the social media, cell phones, and the attention span has just drastically shrunk, especially in the last 5 years. Oh my goodness.
And so then when you say annotating, my feeling on annotation has always been that, like, whatever symbol makes sense to you, use it. Like, it's not necessarily, like, you don't have to write in full sentences. You don't even have to write necessarily in full words. If this makes you think of a pink elephant, draw a pink elephant, because it'll help you remember it if that's an association somehow. Do you have other ideas about what annotation could look like as they develop that skill?
I like the symbols, but I didn't let my students start off with symbols because I didn't want them just to do a quick star and then move on and make it meaningless. So I really would have them write down like a full sentence at first, and then gradually I would have them, you know, step away from that. But if it's, you could even go write the word who and circle the character, where, the setting. You could just circle the word and draw a line, and write the word where, you know, write the word where in the margin. And then this is great for studying, because then you're not looking at your notes going, oh, I don't know where the setting is. You can see your little note of where, and then your eyes immediately go to the circle. So it's a really quick way for you to go back and kind of review the information, so you don't have to reread the whole passage a second or third time, even though I'm not opposed to reading things 2 or 3 times, because you pick up different information and details. But if you don't have time, your kids don't have time, and then, you know, they've taken these notes and they have to review this passage for a test or for a conversation with the teacher, they can go through and get the main points in their own writing. And again, it goes back to writing by hand. And that's another important thing in study skills and organization that I think we're lacking, because everybody wants to do everything online. And there is definitely a time and a place for online, you know, typing. However, the studies show that when you write words out with your hand, the hand is connected to the neural pathways in the brain, and you learn it better. When you're typing, this is me typing, the word cat and dog, they're all the same. When I write the word cat, it's got its specific movement and shapes and stuff, so your brain remembers better. So handwriting things out and annotating, I think, are crucial. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, we don't have time for that. But you got to make time to learn the basics. Once you learn the basics, then yeah, you can go type away all you want. But we've got to learn the basics, and we're trying to rush everybody, all this curriculum and stuff, so much that we're losing the basics. So we've got kids graduating high school who can barely read. We've got kids beginning to graduate from college who don't know how to write really well because they didn't have the basic foundational skills.
All right. So talk to me then. I think that's a transition into critical thinking and reading. The annotation leads into that. We've kind of been tiptoeing around this. In the critical thinking and reading pillar, what's a skill that we can help them develop in addition to the annotation?
Reading images.
Tell me more.
So we are in a visual society. We are inundated with thousands of images a day. If you're on a phone, like, you're just seeing image after image after image after image. Our kids' brains don't know how to read those images. They're passively taking in that information. We've got to switch it, and we've got to make it active opportunities for learning. So, you know, they're looking at commercials. We need to teach them how to read commercials, so they know, like, is this a product that I want? We need to teach them how to watch YouTube videos. We need to teach them how to watch TikTok videos, so they can start to formulate opinions about this and be like, wait a minute, that guy's acting kind of creepy. Like, I don't know if I trust what he's saying, instead of just watching it and going, oh yeah, this is what I need to believe because he's saying it online. You have to teach kids how to discern these things. And so by engaging your kids in conversations about what they see is eventually going to transfer over into what they're reading. But until we really focus on teaching kids how to read images and what they see, because they have been so visual since basically the time they came out of the womb. Like the reading, they're going to read, but they're not, they may comprehend what they're reading, but they're not going to be able to go deep and do that deep analysis that, teachers and colleges and eventually work is going to be asking them to do. So we have to start with the images first. And that's what I think a lot of the whole entire school system is missing. Because again, the school system is based on, 1800s agrarian society, and it has not changed very much. We're still covering the same subjects, almost, 250, 300 years later. We really need to address that. And the younger we address it, the better. But again, I'm not the king of the land or the queen of the land. So.
Right. Well, and so I think to your point of the questioning, the 5 W's and H again come in on reading images, right? Mm-hmm. Who is this? Why do you think they're saying this? If it's a commercial, how much do you think they're getting paid to make this commercial? Mm-hmm. Or, why do you think this character or this particular individual was selected for this commercial to sell this particular product? Why was it a white man versus a Latinx woman, or versus somebody maybe who presents visually as non-binary, or those different types of conversations, and asking who is this, why, and what do you think they're thinking, or what might somebody else be thinking, to prompt those questions. I love it.
Yeah. And it was interesting. My favorite time of the year when I was teaching this was Super Bowl. And I hate football. I am not a sports fan, but the commercials during Super Bowl are the best commercials of the year. And so the day after Super Bowl, I'd come in with my mom's old Rams football jersey. And they're like, you don't like football? I said, but I like the commercials. And we would spend a whole week watching the Super Bowl commercials. And I swear, some of my most reluctant learners, they were the best students that week, because it was engaging. And I remember this one, there was some influencer, his name is Rice Gum, and there was a commercial for some product. I don't remember the product, but the kids were like, oh my God, that's Rice Gum. And I'm like, who is this guy? But it created this beautiful conversation with my students about that was a dream within a dream. And then they did this, and then they used this song. They were doing such high level critical thinking, talking about this commercial that I could never get them to with reading,
Shakespeare or something,
reading a story or a novel. But then what was interesting was once we started getting back into the reading selections, those kids were a lot better prepared, because they had learned how to analyze what they saw, because they understood what they saw once I gave them some guidance. And so you have to kind of scaffold it. You go images and then you go into the reading. You don't just jump into the reading anymore. You can't.
Right.
You can't.
Well, and then does that take us into the writing once they've got the images and then the reading? Mm-hmm. It's like a perfect entree.
And then you got to teach them how to write. And I never, even when I taught high school, I did not start my year off with an essay. And I got in trouble all the time because all the other teachers were doing that. And that's what the curriculum and the pacing guide said to do. But if a kid can't even write a sentence or a paragraph, how am I going to expect them to write an essay? And so we would start subject and opinion. Here's a subject, a cat. What's your opinion about it? So I would have them basically start piecing sentences together. Then once they had that concept down, then I taught them how to do a structured paragraph with a topic, sentence, evidence, and some commentary. And the way I did that is I actually used to dress up in obscure costumes, and I would have the kid, it was called What is Miss Maynard? And I would have the kids, they would have to formulate an opinion about what I was wearing. And then they would have to write a paragraph with evidence from my costume and then explaining why the evidence supported the claim. And we would do that for a week. And that was usually around Halloween time, because, costumes, Halloween. But it was teaching the kids how to write structured writing, but it was also forcing them to come up with an opinion about something, because kids, they just want to be force fed the information nowadays. And I would actually have students get mad at me, like, what are you, Miss Maynard? And I'd say, I don't know. What do you think I am? And they would just get so mad. They're like, even the next day, they'd be like, so what were you yesterday? What did you think I was yesterday? There was no right or wrong answer. And that's a good way to get kids to write, is to come up with some, pretty obscure topics that, there's no right or wrong answer, because it's less stressful for them. Because kids are always like trying to be perfect. Like they want to make their parents happy. They want to make their teachers happy. So it's like, I have to get this right. And in writing, you have to make it as low stakes as possible, as, low stress as possible, because it's very intimidating for kids, especially nowadays.
Well, there was another conversation that I had, and I'm trying to remember with whom I had this conversation. It was part of Empowerthon, and I'm embarrassed that I can't remember it, but it's late in the day and I'm tired on a Thursday, which is like the end of my week. But we were talking about like inquiring of students, asking them, or of your kiddos, asking them questions that don't have a clear right or wrong answer, like you're saying, that just giving them that opportunity, like giving the opportunity, but almost like forcing them to have an answer, like to come up with something, to think about their own thinking, like the metacognitive process of like thinking about what they really believe or what they think about a situation. They're so used to being force fed, whether it's their community teaching them about a religious specifically, or like religion or politics, they get from parents. If parents are particularly one side or the other, they hear that and then they feel like, I have to go down this pathway, or college, or whatever the case is, right? Like they feel like they have to take on whatever their parents have been saying until they rebel against it. They don't necessarily have as many opportunities to speak their own minds. And when we take it away from those high tension areas and we're talking about like, wow, what do you think that person is dressed up as? And give them a chance to have their own opinions about it, it actually builds self-confidence.
Absolutely. And that's one of kids need to feel confident in their learning. If they don't feel confident, if they don't feel like they're being successful, and especially again, nowadays there's a low threshold where kids will just start giving up. I mean, the dropout rates are astounding. Like they were bad 10 years ago. They were bad 10 years ago when I was teaching high school, and they've gotten exponentially worse. COVID did not help that.
No, for sure.
Lots of kids just disappeared. But they're still somewhere. Where are they? What are they doing? And part of it's because the learning was difficult online because no one was ready for it.
Right.
We've got to come up with ways, low stakes learning, low stress, so that kids feel successful. And I think a lot of these curriculums, I'm anti-curriculum. I'm not a big fan of pacing guides and curriculum because there's only a certain number of, textbooks writers in the entire country that they're controlling, all of that information. And so, everybody's expected to do these skills, but if they don't have the foundational learning skills, which I'm such a huge proponent of, it doesn't matter how amazing the curriculum is. It doesn't matter how amazing the prompt is. If they don't know how to learn, and I think a lot of kids are dropping out because they don't know how to learn and they're frustrated and they've given up.
I would have to say that that's something that I've seen as well. And that's why I love having these conversations, because, we've got growing audience in Canada, in Europe, in, the South Pacific, out in Australia and such. And so much of what we're talking about isn't just an American challenge. I don't necessarily know what the educational systems in those other countries are looking like, but critical thinking and reading skills and annotation, and the last pillar that you mentioned, the social and emotional learning, those are human constructs. So let's chat about that for a little bit with the last pillar that, as you mentioned, what's another skill that parents can help kids develop in that space that speaks to this?
Well, this was a newer skill for me. I only did it for the last 2 or 3. I was trained in it the last couple of years of my teaching career. And the difference I saw that it made in my classes was astounding. I mean, and it wasn't anything crazy. I would have my students, we would spend 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning of most classes taking some deep breaths, like breathe in, hold it, breathe out, for a series of 10, just to get the kids calm and grounded. Because if you have kids that are anxious or ADHD, or, they have an IEP of 504, any number of different things, and they come in and they're stressed out, you got to calm that central nervous system down, or it doesn't matter how great your lesson is. They're not going to learn the information. They're not going to remember it because they're like this. And so, just a couple. And the other important thing that I taught my kids was how to start identifying their emotions, because as an American society, like, this is kind of a newer concept, because for years we've been like, okay, you're sad, don't cry. You're angry, like, who cares? Like, you're not allowed to express your feelings. And what they're finding is that these repressed emotions cause health problems, because the body stores the emotions. And so if we teach kids at young ages, like, okay, you're sad, go ahead and cry it out. Take a few minutes, feel that sadness, cry it out. I have a friend down here in Cabo. she's got a 4-year-old daughter, and anytime she gets angry, like they go, shake it off. And so she'll get really angry and she'll shake it off, and then she's fine because she moved through that emotion of anger instead of suppressing it and just holding on to it. So if parents can allow their kids to feel the feelings and not say like, okay, don't be sad, you can't cry. Let them give them a window. Like, don't let them cry for 5 hours. But if they need 5 or 10 minutes to really process that emotion, and then you talk about it with them and like, okay, how did that feel? Why were you feeling sad? Why were you crying? And honoring it instead of shaming them for it. And then giving them a few tools to help them self-regulate, like breathing, like going outside, walking around barefoot for a few minutes, going outside away from the technology and getting in the sun and letting the sun touch your skin. Super easy, super free. Breathing and getting outside are two of the easiest things you can do to help get your kids grounded. Because when
shake it out.
Yeah, and the shake it off thing is amazing. Scream into a pillow. If you're really angry or upset, go scream into a pillow and punch the pillow as hard as you can, because you're not going to hurt a pillow. These simple things will help ground your kids, so then they get those emotions out. They're not feeling the anxiety and the depression, which again, we're looking at today's teens, especially girls, and the rates of depression and anxiety are through the roof, especially in our young girl population. And part of it's because they were never given tools when they were younger. Plus, they're on social media too much.
What's that?
Plus, they're on social media too much, comparing themselves.
I saw a reel the other day, or maybe it was a TikTok. I don't know. It's like those are rabbit holes that you go down and then you're not sure which one you've gone down, right? But it was a Black woman talking about how, like, when she was young, it was never okay to be angry. And so she was the angry kid, and then she became the problem child at school because she was never allowed to identify the cause of the anger or move through it or acknowledge it or heal it or whatever. And she said, I was the angry kid, and then I was the problem child in school, and then I became the angry Black woman. And I decided when I had a daughter that pattern of thinking had to stop. And so she says, now when my daughter gets angry, like, I give her the pillow, or I forget what she said she actually did, but she's like, I let her get it out. And then I stop, and when she's through the emotion, I ask her, what is your anger telling you? Because obviously it was triggered by something. And if we can help them stop and think about, like, what's the message that's coming through? Like, do you feel like you were treated unfairly? Did you feel like somebody else was treated unfairly, which made you upset, but then you didn't know how to step in and handle it, which made it doubly angering, And so, like, helping her work through that and go, hey, anger isn't bad. It's a symptom of something that has occurred or some situation that if we can use it as a tell almost, that then we can work through it more effectively in the long run. I think that ties right in here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's great. And I am seeing more videos online of parents there was that one that went super viral of that little Asian kid with his mom, and he was like 3 or 4. And he was like, the mom was asking, like, why did you feel that way? And he was like, I felt this way. But it was just such a beautiful conversation. And the mom was so present. And I think that's another just really simple thing that parents can take away from this conversation. Be present with your kids. If you sit there and you really listen to them and you look at them and you honor what they're saying, and I hear you saying this, is this what you're saying? And kind of, repeat back what they're saying. When your kids feel heard, because I came from a generation like, the kids, you don't speak until spoken to, and that's really not a way to be raised. And so, being present with your kids, not on a phone, like, no, you need to, especially the teenagers, like even though you think they hate you and they're going through their hormonal changes and stuff, they will remember that you showed up for them and that you were present. Absolutely. And that's going to actually help them transition out of that very tumultuous those teenage years, because they know even though they may say they hate you, they know you love them. And at the end of that whole time, they're going to come back and be like, wow, thank you so much. They really will.
And I think a thought that I just had that I don't think I've ever put it this way before. A lot of times a lot of professionals talk about the distinction between your behavior and your being, right? I love you, but I don't love your behavior right now. And I think it's important for parents to recognize that the same thing typically applies when the kid says, I hate you. It's not that they hate you. They hate the behavior, or they hate the no answer, or they hate that that you won't let them do what they want to do, or whatever the circumstance is. It's not normally you, the person, it's the situation, and they don't like the way it's being handled because it's not what they wanted.
Absolutely. And they don't have the words to actually, they don't understand it. So they hate the parent, but they don't. I mean, barring some horrible abuse that's going on, the kids don't hate their parents. Like they want the kid, they want connection, they want that love. And so the mindfulness and emotional well-being, I think actually is the most important one, because you can't learn, you can't annotate, you can't write, you can't read images, you can't do any of that if your nervous system is out of whack, if it's not regulated. If your kids are anxious, if they're stressed, if they're worried, they're not going to be able to learn. And so giving them some tools, honoring their feelings and giving them some tools, and giving them the space and the presence to let them express those feelings and emotions are going to go so far to help them be able to learn better. But without that, they're not going to be able to learn. I mean, they'll still pick up stuff, but they're not going to remember it because their body's in fight or flight all the time. And when you're in fight or flight, like, it's survival. And when you're in survival, you're not, I mean, how often do we have traumatic things happen and we don't remember what happened because our body went into fight or flight?
Awesome. Allison, it has been awesome to have you back again. I love the conversations that we have, and I love your approach to it as a veteran educator who has left the public school system, and you're going out doing coaching and support on your own. And if I remember, you had said that you had an offer or a program, something related to folks who choose to make a donation to Empowerathon. Can you remind me? Because I don't remember what you said.
So I have an online course that actually goes in extensive detail about my 4 pillars and how parents can actually learn that themselves and help support their children. And so I'm offering anybody with this special code word Tween, you get the course for $27, and those proceeds will go to the Parent Tween Network.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And that it's actually the online course. It's just jam-packed full of all kinds of super valuable information.
Awesome. So awesome. Thank you. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, for folks who are tuning in, this is a conversation part of Empowerathon that, as I mentioned, is a fundraiser. So if you want to take Allison up on that offer to dive into her course to learn more, we appreciate that. Every $27, as she said, comes back to the foundation to help more families. And if you are in a space where you're like, hey, I don't actually have teenagers that's going to impact, and you just want to make a donation through her link, that is in the description of this conversation, everywhere that you could find us, whether it's in our Facebook group, on LinkedIn, or on YouTube. And we appreciate you, Allison. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Catch you later, everybody.